1,500 years ago, Mecca was an inland oasis town. It was small, but the presence of the cube-shaped Kaaba gave it renown throughout Arabia, and it assumed importance as a site for dealing among traders. In 570, Muhammad was born in Mecca, and as an adult made his living as a camel herder for the wealthy Khadija. Khadija saw something special in him, and she proposed marriage to him. Muhammad was 25. On a hot August night in 610, the now 40-year-old Muhammad was sitting at the entrance of a cave on the outskirts of Mecca, avoiding the heat and reflecting on the world. Tradition says he was seized by the angel Jibreel and told, "Recite." It was the first of hundreds of revelations that make up the Quran. Only a few people embraced the belief that these experiences were really from God. Most resented the content of the messages. The messages soundly condemned the greed and injustice of their business dealings. Muhammad was fiercely persecuted in his hometown, and in 622 he accepted the invitation to relocate northward to Medina. His flight with the small group of believers marks the start of the Muslim calendar. His return to Mecca 8 years later set in motion an expanding Islamic empire. Within a century of Muhammad's death, it extended from the Pyrenees of France and Spain, across North Africa, throughout the Middle East, incorporated modern Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and northwestern India. But from the moment Muhammad died, a struggle was underway for the leadership of the community. One group supported Abu Bakr as the successor of the Prophet. He had, they argued, been a Muslim longer than any other person. Another group, whom we know as the Shia, argued that the successor should be a blood relative, Ali. The Abu Bakr group won, and although Ali was the fourth successor, it was, in the eyes of the Shia, too late. The two traditions developed in their own directions, and today there's still a deep divide between them. As with Judaism and Christianity, much of Islam's history deeply intertwines the religious and the political. Until the 20th century, Muslim history was largely marked by dynasties. Some, like the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties from the late 600s to the 1000s, were all-encompassing. Others, like the Fatimids, the Mamluks, and the Mughals, were limited in scope. The last great empire was the Ottoman Empire that arose out of eastern Turkey, conquered the Byzantine Empire's capital, Constantinople, and eventually spread its rule across North Africa, through the Middle East, through Greece and the Balkans, and into Central Asia. The Ottomans ruled for almost 500 years, but their empire finally ended in 1922. Throughout, Muslims fought Muslims. At the same time, Muslims and Christians fought at the edges. Politics aside, however, Islam was making an enormous contribution to the wider world. For Islam, God is known three ways: through revelation, through personal mystic experience, and most fundamentally through the creation itself. In 800, the new Caliph, Al-Ma'mun, took that last one to its logical conclusion. Using the library his great-grandfather had established 40 years earlier, Al-Ma'mun created an empire-wide think tank. He gathered the intellectual works of all of the peoples of the empire, and an immense translation effort was commissioned to make them available in the empire's business language, Arabic. Then he issued a call empire-wide for all scholars of medicine, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and more to come to the House of Wisdom. There, Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians explored, and the result was new insight that became the underpinning of our modern world. As the House of Wisdom began its decline in the 900s, far away in the city of Cordova, the leader of the breakaway Islamic kingdom Al-Andalus envisioned his own capital city as a new House of Wisdom. With a library of 400,000 works, the kingdom, in what would one day become Spain, became the source of the knowledge needed for the European Renaissance. Not everyone saw Islam as a great light, of course. Christians in the far north of the Iberian Peninsula spent 500 years struggling to drive the Muslims out of Europe. And Pope Urban II proclaimed a crusade in 1095 to recapture Jerusalem, a city that had been under Muslim rule for 400 years. That crusade ended in 1099 with a siege of Jerusalem and a slaughter of virtually every man, woman, and child in the city, Muslim, Jew, and Christian. Christians held the city for just 88 years, but a deep scar remains to the present. When the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, European powers sought to fill the vacuum, and they colonized several Muslim countries. Many countries only recently got their independence. Egypt was established as an independent state in 1922. Iraq became independent in 1936, Pakistan and India in 1947, Morocco and Sudan in 1956, Algeria in 1962, Yemen in 1967. The memories of colonial days are still fresh for many. Much of the current Middle Eastern politics has direct ties to this long history of subjugation. In several cases, an emerging national identity and a willingness to fight back against foreign rule was tied to the religious contrast between the ruler and the ruled. The Ottomans, of course, were Islamic, but theirs was a secular Islam, which along with the secular Christianity of the Europeans was often challenged by a fervently religious Islam. Islam has also become a significant part of the non-Muslim world. Muslims were among the first non-Indians in North America, Spanish Moors escaping the new Spanish monarchy's persecutions, accompanying Columbus in 1492. By 1530, African Muslims were being brought over to the New World and becoming slaves. Over the ensuing decades, many slaves embraced the Christianity of their plantation owners, but some continued in their Islam. In an odd detail, when Northern troops burned down the University of Alabama in 1865, including the largest library in the South, only one book was spared: the Quran. Muslim immigration began in earnest in the 1890s with the arrival of people fleeing the Ottoman Empire. By 1915, the first American mosque had been established in Maine, and in 1920, a chapter of the Red Crescent was established in Detroit. Up to 1935, mosques rented or purchased existing buildings, but in that year, the first new mosque was built in the United States, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Today, Islam is a widely varied tradition. Sunnis and Shiites, of course, and the mystical Sufi movement that knows no boundaries, but also the Ahmadiyya and the Ibadi and the Druze and the Nation of Islam in America. Some, like the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, are deeply hostile to those outside, while others, like Faisal Abdul Rauf and his Cordova Initiative, and Abu Patel, the founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps, are profoundly open.